Well, it comes from the Latin, to be called, and I think that's the key. You know, you have a feeling, a very, very strong feeling, and which way you want to go. I know that was true in my situation. I had a very strong pull, you know, towards the priesthood. Of course, the head figures into it. You know, do I really want to have a family, children, and the challenges of that, bringing them up? Do I want to be a priest and these challenging? You know, there's a shortage of priests. That means I'm going to be working a lot. You know, and I'm not going to be able to marry. You know, so can I go through life alone? You know, so of course the head enters the picture as well. But for vocation, you know, first comes the heart, and then comes the head. Well, I didn't hear any voices. Very few of us do. I wanted to be a high school history teacher, but I had an accident, and so I was laid up at a freak accident, which laid me up for a long time, and I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I said, well, what do I really want to do? You see, and I says, well, actually, you know, I think I'm very attracted to the priesthood. So I put aside the idea of, I think maybe I put aside the idea of a priesthood because I thought it was I can't become a priest. You know, it's a long, many years of study. In my day, it was 8 years. You know, they didn't have the flexibility that they have now in different ways of studying for the priesthood. So it was 8 years. Oh, can I study that long, and can I handle the studies? You know, and so I wasn't listening to. I kind of wasn't listening to my heart. I put that aside. You see, but in that time of recovering, I said, well, what do I really want to do? Well, let's try this. Okay, and if I can't handle the studies, well, then I'll go back to my other idea of being a high school history teacher. And of course, God it's funny how for 14 years, I was able to teach as a priest. For me, it was easy, because, well, wait a minute here, you know, I love the Mass. The Mass was very, very central in my vocation. And of course, in my day, it was the Tridentine Mass, you know, but I thought this was the most beautiful thing in the world, you know, and so I was always attracted to the Mass. And so actually, once I had, you know, thought it through during that time period, it actually was easy in my case. I didn't fight it. I was always kind of naturally religious. My family didn't practice the faith, so I went to Mass by myself. And as a child, I rode my bicycle to Mass on Sunday, and so I was inclined that way, and I asked religious questions. So it was there when I was a child. There was one priest who impressed me when I was preparing for confirmation, actually before. So, you know, confirmation probably starting 8th grade, and he was just a very good priest, and he could relate to us. He was into astronomy. He had built his own telescope himself, which I thought was really cool, and he could relate to us, and so I was very impressed with him. So I'm sure that was a factor, you know. And it's important. It's hard to emulate. It's hard to go into a vocation if you don't know anyone who is in that vocation, you know. And I think this is maybe a problem today because there's so few priests and nuns, so you might not be able to have a relationship with them. But I was fortunate to have him as a teacher for a couple of years in catechism, because those are the days when priests actually could teach catechism, because there were a few more priests, you know. So the pastor of the parish impressed me by the way he celebrated Mass. You know, he was the one who made it a beautiful experience, and you felt that you were in the presence of God when he celebrated the Mass. I can't think of anything that took me by surprise. I really can't think of it. Maybe it's because we had such good preparation. You know, certainly doing the work I do is a surprise, because most parish priests do not do the work that I do. I do parish work, but it's really not my primary work, ministry. You know, it's ecumenical work, and there are not many of us that do that. So that's a surprise. You know, I had an interest in it from day one of my priesthood, but I didn't think that I'd be doing the ecumenical work. You know, so that was a surprise, but not a surprise in terms of, gee, I wasn't prepared for this. I mean, I've had some pretty scary things. You know, one of the first persons I anointed was murdered, and I was just ordained a couple of months, and I was so nervous. Who wouldn't be? You know, that I lost the keys to my car, and I had to walk back to the parish. You know, because I was shaking. I was so nervous. But that's to be understood. So that certainly was a surprise. We didn't practice that in the seminary. I'm a diocesan priest. We're also known as secular priests. And secular is another Latin word which means of the world, or in the world. And that's a very good description of what we are. We're not monks. We're in the world. And we do counseling, and we have to know something about married life. We have to know something about pastoral psychology. We have to know how to handle a family grieving when somebody dies. We do not have a vow of poverty, so we do have to take care of our own finances, just like you. You know, we have to prepare for retirement and so forth. We are in the world. You know, we're in the world but not of the world. But so there is this misconception that we're monks. We're not monks. We are active, very active, and we have to struggle to find, especially with the shortage of priests, we have to struggle to find time to study and pray, just like you do. You know, it's wonderful that we have to preside at Mass, because we have to prepare for that. Okay, and that's the touchstone for a lot of priests. So, you know, one time I was at when I was teaching at Mater Dei, I went to one of the school dances, you know, to supervise, and on the way back, home, I got in an accident, not my fault, and I was so mad at the other person's insurance person, because he said very rudely, "What is a priest doing out at 11 o'clock at night?" Well, we're not monks. I mean, we're in the world. I mean, I have to supervise dances and games, and in the parish we have sick calls in the middle of the night, but this person thought, that we stay in our little rectory and we retire at 8 a.m. so that we can get up in the middle of the night to pray, and, total misconceptions, I think hopefully not too many people still have that misconception of us. So we were very much in the world, very active. So if you run into me catching the midnight debut of a movie, don't be shocked. Or if you run into me in a restaurant having a glass of wine with my meal, don't know. This is our way of life. I think that every priest if he's honest with himself, and maybe it's because there have been so many crises, in the last, since Vatican II, and the shortage of priests. I think if a priest is honest with himself, that I think every priest has probably asked, what have I gotten myself into? But I think if you ask your parents, every marriage has its high points and its low points, and you question, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? This is just part of the struggle of life and maturing in your vocation. That's very easy to answer because you have to be a man to be ordained, and of course that's a controversial topic. Personally, I can understand the Church's teaching. The priest is an icon of Christ, especially when he's presiding at Mass. You wouldn't go to a play where the protagonist is male and cast a female for that male role. You wouldn't you see, or a musical, A Man of La Mancha, and a woman would be playing the Don Quixote. The Mass is a sacred drama, and really, if you think about it, it's the most dramatic of dramas. It's the Last Supper, and it is the most dramatic of dramas because you have bread and wine being turned into the body and blood of Christ. And so the idea that the priest is to be, the priest represents Christ, and then of course the maleness, it makes perfectly good sense to me. The priest is privileged to be there at the key moments in a person's life, and that is a great blessing and joy, that you're there to witness the marriage and share in the joy of that. You're there to baptize the children, and that is a blessing and very joyful. You're there maybe at the last moments of someone's life and can help them in their taking the next step into the next world, and then console the family. It's a great privilege to be part of people's lives at the key moments of life, and that is a blessing and a great source of joy. Well, these are challenging. It seems like everything's in crisis. If you talk to a teacher, a public school teacher, they've slashed the funds, and what they ask of us is impossible. And my brother is a public school teacher. And if you're in medicine, we're in crisis, and we're overwhelmed, and everybody wants to sue us, and now we're transitioning to Affordable Care Act, and we're in crisis. It seems like everyone's in crisis, and maybe we are, because of the times. And so, the priesthood has been through, the priesthood in our church is the time of crisis for us. I think the first crisis is just the shortage. I was ordained in 1975, and there were 6 of us ordained. Orange didn't exist for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and the bishop's secretary was saying to us, I have 80 openings, and there are only 6 of you being ordained. So, the crisis has been with us for a long time. And so, the workload is over. It really is. It really can be overwhelming because, a parish like ours with 4,000 families, and we have 3 priests, and, but really we need 6, 7, 8 priests. We're lucky to have the 3. But really, in order to minister well or better, we need 6, 7, 8 priests. So it can be overwhelming, and you also have to go through life alone, and that's very challenging. Most people need a spouse, and to help you through life. And that can be very, very challenging. You have to have a very strong spiritual life and a very good network of friends. So that's a challenge for a lot of priests. I can remember one experience where I was visiting a friend in the hospital at Hogue, not a Catholic hospital, and I was in the parking lot. I hadn't even got into the church, and I was into the hospital, and I was stopped by a nurse in the parking lot saying, I have a relative in the hospital, would you please visit her? I said, oh, of course. So I visited my friend first, and went and visited her relative, and then I'm going to go into the elevator, and the man comes out of the elevator and says, are you a priest? Yes. Did you see my relative? Well, this happened several times because I saw this. So I spent my whole day at Hogue, going from room to room. I'll never forget that day. I finally had to tell the staff there, because the chaplain was his day off. I said, can you break me into his office so I can get the Eucharist to take to people? So I spent the whole day at Hogue. And just people bumping in, please come. One man anointed him right before, 5 minutes before his surgery, and countless times been confirmed in my vocation by extraordinary things, just running into people because they know I'm a priest. It doesn't have to be because of this. I could be at a party, and people will come up to me, and they know he's a priest, So they come up to me, and we have a conversation. I answer their questions, and they go away. They go away happy, and maybe come back to church. And this happens to me countless times. It's easy because I have to stand up in front of 1,000 people every Sunday and have something to say to them in the homily. And I'm very much aware of the fact that, again, 90% of the people, or maybe more, the only time they're not going to be reading their Bible, they're not going to be reading a spiritual book. The majority of people, the only spiritual message or direction they're going to receive is that homily on Sunday. So that they have to carry through the week until the next Sunday. So the homily, preparing for that homily, is very, very important. It's number one. It should be for priests. Again, because we're, because of the priest shortage, we're running here and there, and sometimes we fail. I've fallen asleep through homilies when consecrating, but anyway, this is not priority. Well, this forces, I'm forced to encounter the Word of God, every week, and of course if you celebrate daily Mass, every day, So you're forced to encounter the Word, meditate on it, pray over it. What can I share with the people of God that will help them? It's easy if you're attentive. You have to walk the walk and talk the talk. I have to pray. I won't be able to get through the week if I don't pray. I can't be exhorting people to grow in Christ if I'm not growing in Christ. So that means prayer every day. I can't tell people to pray if I'm not praying. I can't tell people, you have to study your faith, if I'm not studying the faith.